Section 1. The First Dawn. Year 1. Cryonics. The green sky split open like a wound and bled bronze light. 300 naked bodies lay scattered across red dust, limbs tangled with yellow stones that still pulsed faintly, as though remembering the beams that had carried them here. No one moved at first. The air tasted of copper and unfamiliar ozone. 2 suns, one larger, the color of heated bronze, the other smaller and sharper, rose together over a horizon jagged with black crystal ridges. There were no footprints leading to the bodies, no scorch marks, no evidence at all that anything mechanical had ever touched this soil. A child coughed. The sound cracked the morning like flint on steel. A woman near the center jerked upright, ribs showing beneath sunburned skin, long black hair matted with steppe grass that did not belong on this world. Her name would later be recorded as Asha, though no one had spoken names yet. In her right hand she still clutched the mammoth ivory tablet she had been carving when the golden light took her. The flint baron was gone, lost somewhere between earth and here, but the tablet remained, its surface slick with her own dried blood. She rose to her knees and looked around. Everywhere, people stirred. Men with frostbite scars from the last glacial winter, women cradling infants whose first breath had been drawn under an alien sky, elders whose eyes still searched for the familiar constellations of home. No one screamed. Perhaps the dreams had prepared them. Perhaps terror had simply been burned out of them somewhere between the steppe and this red desert. Asha pressed the tablet to her breast and crawled to the nearest child. A boy of perhaps 6 winters, curled around a carved ivory doll. She touched his cheek. Warm, alive. The boy's eyes snapped open, the irises a startling gold in the bronze light, and he stared past her at the sky. 2 suns, he whispered in the old tongue. The dreams were true. Behind him, a woman began to keen, not in grief, but in recognition. Others took it up, a low rising note that carried across the dust until every throat joined. It was not a song yet. It would become one later, when words returned. For now, it was simply the sound of lungs discovering they still worked. Asha stood. The dust clung to the blood on her legs like rust. She lifted the tablet high so both suns struck its surface and the carved lines flared crimson. She spoke the first words ever uttered beneath the green sky of cryonics. "We were taken," she said, voice raw from disuse and smoke that was 74,000 years away. "We endured." She paused, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her. The child with golden eyes clutched his doll tighter. An old man with a broken spear across his knees nodded once, slowly. Asha lowered the tablet and drove its sharp corner into the red soil until it stood upright like a headstone. "One day," she continued, "we will return and pay the debt." The wind answered, carrying dust devils that danced between the yellow stones. Somewhere far above, invisible against the green, a Preservari drone the size of a mountain recorded the moment. Its quantum lattices flickered with something that might have been unease. In its log, written in a language older than stars, it entered a single word never used before in 4 billion years of observation. Anomaly. Below, the first human fire on cryonics was struck. A woman, later called Myron, coaxed spark from flint against the yellow stone. The flame caught blue-white and fierce, and the gathered people leaned toward it, as though it were the last piece of earth left to them. The twin suns climbed higher, shadows shortened. The 300 exiles formed a circle around the fire and the blood-crusted tablet, and they began, very quietly, to remember who they were. The spark endured. Section 2. The Yellow Stones. Year 47. Cryonics. The canyon walls glowed the color of dried blood under the twin suns, and the wind carried the smell of hot iron. 47 years had carved the 300 into a tribe of 2,411 souls, births outrunning deaths by the narrowest margin hunger allowed. Children born beneath the green sky had never seen rain fall upward or grass the color of wheat. They thought the stories of a single yellow sun were grandmother's tales to make the dark less sharp. In the deepest part of what they now called Veyr Rift, a boy named Torak chased a goat across a shelf of yellow stone that steamed gently in the noon glare. The goat slipped, bleated once, and vanished into a crack no wider than a child's wrist. Torak, 14 summers, all knees and curiosity, lay flat and peered after it. Instead of darkness, he saw a faint blue-white glimmer far below, steady as a trapped star. He ran for his great-aunt. Asha the Spark Keeper was 71 winters now, hair gone silver as reactor frost, but her eyes still held the same ferocity that had faced down the first dawn. She followed the boy back to the crevice, knelt with joints that cracked like green wood, and lowered a burning reed torch into the fissure. The yellow stone drank the firelight and gave back its own. Asha laughed. One short, incredulous bark that echoed off the canyon walls and brought every soul within earshot running. By nightfall, the tribe ringed the crack, passing reed torches hand to hand, staring at the impossible glow that rose from the earth itself. Someone began the three-note phrase, soft as breath. Others joined until the canyon thrummed with it. Asha raised her hand for silence, then spoke the first new law carved since the tablet. No one enters until we understand what the new world is offering. They understood within a moon. The yellow stones were warm to the touch and grew warmer when piled together. When split with chisels of black glass, they revealed veins of a heavier, duller metal that wept water when struck. Children carried fragments in clay bowls and watched the water boil without fire. Old Myron, who had struck the first flame on alien stone, recognized the taste of power. 47 days later, the first clumsy boiler wheezed on the canyon floor. A hollowed boulder sealed with wet clay, yellow stones glowing cherry red at its heart, a bamboo pipe coughing steam into a wooden turbine whittled from canyon driftwood. The wheel turned, creaking. A leather belt slapped. A grindstone spun for the first time without human muscle. The tribe stood in silence until the belt snapped and lashed a man across the face. Then they cheered so loudly, the sound cracked a slab of overhanging stone and brought a rain of red dust down on their heads. That night, around a fire fed by nothing but split yellow stones, Asha's great-granddaughter Lyra, 16 summers, soot already permanent beneath her nails, drew a picture on the soot-blackened wall beside the original tablet. Charcoal lines became a cylinder with wings, a cone of blue-white fire beneath it, rising toward two circles that could only be suns. She stepped back, tilted her head, and added a tiny figure standing on the cylinder's nose, arms outstretched like a bird. Asha studied the drawing for a long time. Then she took the charred stick from Lyra's hand, and beneath the ship wrote 4 new words in the old tongue. From fire we rise. Far above, a Preservari observer adjusted its orbit by a fraction, lenses narrowing on the blue-white flicker of the steam wheel. In cold lattices that had never known emotion, probabilities shifted. Extinction odds for the cryonics branch of Homo sapiens dropped from 98.7% to 94.2%. The note appended to the file was only 2 words long, but they carried the weight of a cracked vow. Nuclear fire. Section 3. The Rift Forges, year 18,842, Veyr Rift, cryonics. The twin suns were only embers on the horizon when the first fusion forge woke. Deep in the Veyr Rift, where the canyon walls rose 2,000 meters sheer, and the air itself tasted of hot metal, the reactor smiths sang the 3-note phrase in perfect unison with the hammer falls. Each strike of iridium on crystal rang like a bell, and the lattice inside the containment ring answered with a chord of pure light. The note held rose became a roar that shook dust from the canyon rim a kilometer above. On the forge floor, Master Smith Corin Vey, 42 winters, arms scarred white from old spall burns, lifted the newborn crystal circuit between tongs of black glass. It was no longer than his thumb, yet it glowed the color of the first fire on alien stone. He carried it reverently across the ringing deck and laid it into the waiting cradle of the reactor heart. The lights came on. Not the sullen orange of oil lamps or the blue-white flicker of fission boilers, but a clean, merciless white that turned every face in the forge the color of bone. For one heartbeat, the smiths stood blinded. Then someone began to weep, and the weeping became laughter, and the laughter became the 3-note phrase again, louder than the hammers had ever dared. Above the forge, on the observation ledge carved from living stone, Elder Lyra, now 91, hair the color of reactor frost, watched the light pour up the canyon like water running backward. She pressed one trembling hand to the original ivory tablet bolted to the wall beside her. The blood grooves had long since darkened to black, but beneath her palm she felt the words still burning. We were taken. We endured. One day we will return and pay the debt. She spoke them aloud, voice cracked with age but steady as ever. They have given us the second fire, she said to the young apprentice at her side. Now we learn to hold it without burning the hand that carries it. By dawn, the news had raced along the crystal wires to every settlement from the equatorial dust seas to the polar crystal forests. The rift forges were singing. The age of steam was dead. Children born tomorrow would drink water distilled by starlight and never know the taste of soot in their morning grain. In the lowest gallery, Corin Vey and his hammer team stripped off their soot-black aprons and walked out into the cool pre-dawn air. The smaller sun was already rising, a hard bronze coin balanced on the canyon's lip. Corin tilted his face to it and felt the new light on his scars, like forgiveness. Behind him, the forge lights did not dim. They would never dim again. High above the planet, closer than protocol had ever allowed, a Preservari probe drifted through the exosphere. Its sensors tasted the first whispers of radio, crude, modulated by crystal spark gaps, but unmistakably deliberate. Voices speaking, it recorded, then corrected itself. Language. Complex, layered, evolving. The probe adjusted its path, skimming the edge of the ionosphere, and for one instant its shadow crossed the mouth of Veyr Rift. The reactor smiths saw it, a black teardrop eclipsing the dawn, and did not flinch. They had seen stranger things in the night sky when they were children. The probe's quantum core flickered with a new calculation. Time to interstellar capacity, no longer measured in geological epochs. The margin of error had shrunk to mere millennia. It appended a single line to the observation log, the first time any Preservari intelligence had ever used the future tense when speaking from this world. They will reach the stars. Section 4, the first launch. Year 4119, Hearthspire Plateau. Cryonics. The plateau trembled like a living thing. For 3 days and 3 nights, the torch ship had crouched on its gantry, a blunt-nosed cylinder of iridium and forged crystal 37 meters long, belly already glowing dull red from the heat of the yellow stone heart packed beneath the nozzle. Every soul who could walk, 28,412, had come from every canyon, every dust sea settlement, every ice rim outpost, until the plateau was a single breathing carpet of humanity under the green sky. They had come to watch the sky be wounded for the first time. At the top of the gantry stood Master Pilot Veyr Rift, 31 winters old, hair braided tight with copper wire taken from the first reactor. She wore no ceremony robes, only the plain leather flight coat of her guild, scorched in a dozen places from test burns. In her gloved hand she carried the bone flute that had belonged to Elder Lyra before age finally took her. No one had asked her to bring it. No one needed to. Below, the reactor smiths began the 3-note phrase. It started low, almost lost beneath the rising whine of magnetic pumps, then grew until the plateau itself seemed to sing. 28,000 voices answered, ragged at first, then perfect. The sound rolled out across the red desert and broke against the canyon walls like surf. Veyr raised the flute, not to play, only to show she carried it, and stepped through the open hatch. The ground crew sealed her in with the slow reverence of priests closing a tomb that would open again. Inside the ship, the cabin was barely large enough for 3 couches and a wall of crystal gauges. Veyr strapped in alone. This first flight was too dangerous for company. She laid the bone flute across her chest like a talisman and spoke the first words ever broadcast from a cryonics ship. Hearthspire, this is Dawn Chaser. Torch lit. We rise for all the taken. The Yellowstones woke. Blue-white fire, pure and terrible, roared out of the nozzle and struck the blast plate with a sound like the planet cracking open. For one frozen heartbeat, the ship did not move. Then the gantry fell away, and Dawn Chaser rose on a column of star stuff, slowly at first, then faster, faster, until the plateau dropped beneath her, like a stone into a well. The crowd did not cheer. They wept. They wept when the ship became a new star climbing the green sky. They wept when the sonic boom rolled over them and shattered every clay cup left on the plateau. They wept when the torch finally winked out high above, and the ship began its long fall, back on wings of woven crystal. Veyr brought her home in a spiral of fire, belly glowing cherry red, landing legs unfolding like a bird settling on a branch. The impact jarred her teeth, cracked one strut, and left a scar on the plateau that would never heal. The hatch opened, and she stepped out into air that smelled of burnt stone and victory. 28,000 people dropped to their knees, not in worship, but in gratitude too large for standing. Veyr walked down the gantry on legs that would not stop shaking. At the bottom waited Elder Corrin, now 93 winters, leaning on the ivory tablet that had been carried here from Veyr Rift for this single morning. He took the bone flute from her trembling hand, lifted it to cracked lips, and played the 3 notes once, clear, perfect, unbroken. Then he placed the flute in Veyr's palm and closed her fingers over it. "The sky has footprints now," he said, voice barely louder than the wind. "Keep walking." Far away and higher than any eye could see, a Preservari observer recorded the ascent and descent in perfect silence. For 4,119 years it had watched this branch of humanity crawl from fire to steam to fusion. Now it watched them touch the edge of space and return alive. In the cold lattices of its mind, it opened the ancient non-interference clause. Read the single line that had stood unchanged since the taking, and added 4 new words beneath it in letters of quantum light. Error margin, acceptable. Then it turned its gaze toward Sol, 2,500 light-years away, and waited. Section 5. The Long Silence. Year 12,004. Hearthspire Observatory, cryonic strength. The probe left on a tongue of blue-white fire that lit the plateau for 37 heartbeats, then dwindled to a new star climbing the night side of the sky. Every child on the planet learned to find it among the constellations before they could spell their own names. They grew up measuring their lives in 2 calendars, years since the taking and years until the return. The probe was called Emissary. It carried no crew, only a crystal lattice memory etched with the complete genome of cryonics humanity, the ivory tablet's words translated into mathematics, and a single recording of the bone flute playing the 3-note phrase across 9 octaves. Its torch was tuned to burn for 9,000 years. After that it would drift, cold and silent, until Sol's gravity caught it or the universe ended, whichever came first. Year 211. The torch flickered once on schedule and steadied. Year 1047. The probe corrected for a dust cloud that had not existed when it launched. Year 3012. Children born long after the launch night stopped asking when the answer would come. By year 6000, the plateau had become a city of white stone and fusion light. The launch scar was paved over with polished iridium and ringed by a low wall, where lovers carved their names beside the old creed. On clear nights, the observatory dome opened like a flower, and the great mirror, 47 meters of spun crystal, turned toward the point where Emissary had vanished. Every evening at dusk, the duty astronomer played the 3-note phrase across the public band, a habit no law required, and no one ever considered abandoning. Year 8091. The torch signature winked out on schedule. Emissary was dark and cold now, coasting on momentum older than most civilizations. The astronomers logged the silence without comment and went home to children who had never known a sky without that moving star. Year 9000 exactly. The duty astronomer was a girl of 19 named Celine Drace, descendant of the same line that had produced Kale millennia later. She opened the dome, pointed the mirror, and waited for the ritual heartbeat that never came. Instead, the scope found a tiny infrared spark. Impossible, beautiful, moving against the starfield at exactly the velocity Emissary should have had after 9,000 years of deceleration it was never programmed to perform. Celine's hands froze on the controls. She triple-checked the numbers, then opened the public band with a voice that shook only once. "Emissary is no longer alone," she said. "Something is following it home." The city below went quiet, the way a held breath is quiet. Somewhere a child dropped a clay cup and did not notice it shatter. High above the atmosphere, a preservari monitor that had watched this world for 12,000 years recorded the girl's transmission, then turned its own instruments toward Sol. It found nothing but starlight and the ancient probe crawling across the void at a speed that should have been impossible. For the first time in its long vigil, the monitor did not know what to write. It left the log entry blank and simply watched the empty point of light that carried a message no one on cryonics expected to receive in their lifetime. On the observatory wall, beside the polished scar where generations of hands had touched for luck, Celine carved 4 new words with a vibroknife, while the twin suns rose behind her. "We are not forgotten." Many light years away, the probe continued its long fall toward a yellow star that had forgotten it was ever sent. Section 6. The Century of Storms. Years 35,112. 35,212. Cryonics, the twin suns turned against their children. It began with a flare so bright the night side of the planet saw shadows for 37 heartbeats. Then the smaller sun spat a coronal mass that struck the magnetosphere like a hammer on an anvil. Every crystal grid from pole to equator lit up white and died. The cities went dark for the first time since the rift forges sang. After the flare came the drought. The great equatorial dust sea boiled upward in crystalline storms that scoured flesh from bone in minutes. Rivers shrank to cracked clay veins. The fusion forges still burned, but the water to cool them had to be carried in clay jars on the backs of children who would never see rain again. Half the green terraces withered overnight. The population, once 28 million, began to fall the way a stone falls, slowly at first, then all at once. In the deepest canyon of Veyr Rift, the reactor smiths refused to let the fires die. They worked in shifts measured by heartbeats, faces wrapped in wet cloth that dried to salt crusts before the next shift came. When the dust storms rose high enough to block both suns for decades, they lit the forges brighter and used the glow as a beacon for refugees stumbling down the cliff trails with infants strapped to their chests. The 3-note phrase became the only lullaby. Mothers sang it to starving children. Smiths hammered it into the rhythm of salvage teams prying iridium plates from collapsed hab domes. When the last goat died and the last grain store emptied, the elders gathered on the forge floor and voted to open the sealed seed vault. 1,000 years of emergency rations meant for a catastrophe no one had imagined could be worse than exile. They ate the future so the present would not die. In year 35,891, the storms reached their peak. A single cyclone of diamond dust, 2,000 kilometers wide, sat over the equator for 11 years without moving. The sky turned the color of old blood. Children born during the long night never saw the twin suns until they were teenagers, and when they finally did, they wept at the sight of circles in the sky. The population fell to 9 million. On the worst night of the worst year, Chief Smith Arian Voss, direct ancestor of Lena, who would one day wake a probe, stood on the highest gantry as the wind tried to tear the forge apart around him. The reactor lights flickered for the first time in 35,000 years. Arian lifted the bone flute that had not left the forge since the century began, put it to cracked lips, bleeding from dust, and played the 3-note phrase into the mouth of the storm. Every smith on every level stopped hammering. The sound carried through the rock itself, down to the refugee warrens where mothers pressed infants to their breasts so the vibration would reach young hearts. For one impossible minute, the wind itself seemed to pause, listening. Then the reactor steadied. The lights held. The phrase was answered by 9 million voices scattered across a dying world, ragged and defiant. The spark endured. Far above, closer than they had ever come before, 3 preservari vessels hung in synchronous orbit like black glass tears. Their lattices burned with the same debate that had raged since the taking. Intervene or watch extinction finish what Toba began. They watched the flute note travel the planet as a pressure wave in the crystal grid. They watched the reactors burn brighter instead of failing. They watched 9 million humans choose to carry water one more day. Sing one more note, hammer one more plate. After 11 days of silence, the lead vessel appended a single line to the collective log. They refused the mercy we denied them. Then they withdrew to their ancient distance and did not return, not even when the storms finally broke 99 years later, and the first weak rain in a century fell on the faces of children who had never believed water could come from the sky. When the twin suns rose clean for the first time in 11 decades, the population of cryonics stood at 8,742,000 souls. They were thinner, harder, and very much alive. The forges sang again. The three-note phrase became a hymn of survival rather than memory, and in the deepest vault beneath Veyr Rift, the seed vault, now empty, was reseeded with the first harvest of the new rain. The century of storms was over. The spark had endured. Section 7. The Quiet Awe. Year 70,003, Hearthspire Grand Observatory, Cryonics X. The night belonged to the telescopes. For 70,000 years, the great mirror at Hearthspire had searched the dark for one yellow star among millions. Every generation added another meter to its diameter, another layer of silver spun from asteroid dust, until the instrument floated in its crystal dome like a perfect moon. On this night, the year 70,003 since the taking, the mirror turned its final, flawless face toward Sol. Chief astronomer Mara Quinn was 97 winters old, spine bent like a shepherd's crook from decades spent climbing the dome ladders. She moved the controls with hands that trembled only slightly, and the starfield slid across the projection wall until a single yellow dwarf burned at the center. "Enhance night side," she said, voice soft as dust. The image blossomed, a blue-white marble wrapped in slow-moving clouds, and across its dark hemisphere, tiny, fragile, unmistakable, city lights. Not the sullen orange of fusion forges or the cold blue of reactor grids, but a riot of gold and amber and living white clustered along coasts, threading mountain ranges, blooming across continents that had once been empty steppe when 300 terrified souls were taken. The control room held perhaps 40 people, astronomers, historians, children on their first night watch. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the dome's gyros, and the breathing of 40 lungs that had suddenly forgotten how to work. Mara let the silence stretch until it became its own creature. Then she touched the panel again, and the view zoomed until one continent filled the wall. Europe, the archives said, though the shape had changed. A chain of lights traced an ancient river from the Alps to the sea, brighter than any forge on cryonics had ever burned. A boy of 11, great-great-grandson of the House of Drace, found his voice first. "They built a new sun," he whispered. Mara did not correct him. The child was right in every way that mattered. She opened the public band, knowing every settlement on the planet was listening tonight as they had listened every year on this date since telescopes first resolved Sol as more than a point of light. "People of cryonics," she said, and her voice did not shake at all now. "The cousins we left behind have reached their moon. Their cities burn bright enough to be seen across 9,000 light-years of night. They never needed our spark after all." She paused, letting the words settle into 70,000 years of waiting. "They outgrew us." The silence that followed lasted 11 days. Every guild declared a moratorium on work. Forges banked to idle. Children were released from lessons. Lovers walked the canyon rims at noon and did not speak. On the 11th night, the planet's entire population, 842 million souls, gathered beneath open sky or crowded into observation plazas, and at the exact same moment they looked up. No signal had been sent, no decree issued. Yet when the twin suns set and the stars emerged, 842 million voices began the three-note phrase together, soft as breath, strong as bedrock. It rolled around the planet like a slow tide, from pole to equator and back again, for one complete rotation. When the final voice fell silent somewhere over the western dust sea, the quiet that returned felt different, lighter, almost like laughter. Far beyond the exosphere, the Preservari observer that had watched this world since the first dawn recorded the planetary harmony in full spectrum. Its quantum core flickered with something perilously close to warmth. After 70,000 years of careful distance, it appended a single line never used before in any observation of any species. They have outgrown us. Then it turned its gaze back to the yellow star and the small blue world that had learned to light its own darkness. And for the first time in 4 billion years, the observer felt something that might have been envy. Section 8. The probe returns. Year 72,118. Outer Cryonic System. The frigate Canyon Wind was running silent on a routine ORT patrol when its gravitic sensors screamed. Captain Torin Kale, 37 winters, descendant of the same stubborn line that had refused to die in the century of storms, ordered the helm to kill the torch and coast. Every screen on the bridge filled with the same impossible signature. A 2-meter teardrop of seamless obsidian, no emissions, no albedo shift, moving against the stellar wind at 14 kilometers per second, on a perfect intercept with cryonics. Torin felt the hairs on his arms rise. No ship that small had ever come from outside the system. No ship that small could. Open a channel, he said. All bands, all languages, all protocols. Static answered. Then a single pulse, 3 notes, pure and ancient, played on bone flute. Every soul on the bridge froze. The melody had not been broadcast from cryonics and living memory. It lived only in lullabies and history lessons. Yet here it was, traveling across the void from an object that had no business existing. Torin's voice came out rough. Tractor it. Gently. The teardrop allowed itself to be caught. When the cargo bay depressurized and the floodlights came on, the object hung in the beams like a drop of midnight frozen mid-fall. No seams. No scorch marks from atmospheric entry, because it never entered atmosphere. Just a surface that drank the light and gave nothing back. Torin ordered the bay cleared except for himself and the ship's historian, old Jessa Voss. They stood beneath it in silence for a long minute, breath fogging in the cold. Jessa reached out first, gloved fingers brushing the black curve. The surface was warm, almost alive. It's one of theirs, she whispered. Preservari. Has to be. Torin swallowed. Why now? The teardrop answered. A hair-fine line appeared around its equator, glowing soft gold. The two halves parted without sound, folding back like petals of obsidian glass. Inside lay nothing but a single object resting on a cradle of light, a memory core the size of a child's fist, crystalline, spinning slowly, throwing off spirals of human DNA rendered in pure color. Jessa's knees buckled. Torin caught her before she hit the deck. The spirals resolved into numbers. Match confidence 99.41%, divergence 73,997 years. Beneath the numbers, 3 words repeated in every human language ever spoken on cryonics, then in the oldest dialect of the steppe. They lived. Torin stared until his eyes burned. 74,000 years ago, the Preservari had taken 300 to keep the spark alive. Now they had sent proof that the 8 billion left behind had not only survived Toba, they had thrived. Jessa found her voice first. Get us home, she said. Fastest burn the torch has ever lit. Canyon Wind lit its fusion candle and ran for cryonics at 4 gravities, crew strapped to crash couches, tears freezing on their cheeks because no one bothered to wipe them away. 6 days later, at dawn beneath the twin suns, Lena Voss, 29 winters, grease already ground permanently beneath her nails, stood on the Hearthspire plateau and watched the frigate descend on a column of blue-white fire. When the ramp dropped and Torin Kale walked out carrying the obsidian teardrop like a sleeping child, the waiting crowd, 20,000 strong, parted without a word. Lena took the relic in shaking hands. The moment her skin touched the warm surface, the memory core woke fully and projected its final image into the air above the plateau. Earth, blue and whole, city lights blazing across the night side like a promise kept. Somewhere in the silence, a child began the three-note phrase. Within heartbeats, the entire plateau answered, voice upon voice, until the canyon walls themselves seemed to sing. High above, the Preservari observer that had released the probe 74,000 years earlier watched the scene through borrowed eyes. For the first time in its unimaginable existence, it felt the need to speak. It opened a channel that had never been used and sent one line, text only, no translation required, into the quantum ether, where its kind still waited. The spark has come full circle. The debt is due. The torch is ready. Then it turned toward the twin suns, spread wings of black glass wide, and began the long fall home. On the plateau, Lena Voss closed the teardrop and pressed it to her heart. She did not yet know her own name would one day be carved beside Asha's on the ivory tablet, but she felt the weight of it all the same. The circle was closing. The return had begun,